Welcome to our latest episode of the Technocrats.
A report which said that supply chain disruptions actually has caused actually 61% decline in customer dissatisfaction and also a 41% drop in the shareholder value itself. So I think if I'm actually listening and I would like to have a plan which can make my supply chain resilient. So I think that comes to my next question is, okay, I'm ready. Where should I start? What should be my approach to handle this? And what are the best practices out there which I can actually learn from so that I don't do the mistakes which others are doing?
Yeah, great question. And, let me, I guess, start off by talking about that in a general sense for a moment. I'm a big fan of the Chinese general Sun Tzu. And one of my favorite quotes of his is know thyself. So, today, know thyself doesn't just mean, know your operations and know your supply chain. It means, know your customers and know your suppliers, as well as really looking in the mirror and understanding what your company is strong, what their strengths are and what the weaknesses are. So I think the first thing that I would recommend to companies start doing is, really understand which products are moving through which locations and when. You have some of this data in the point of sales data, and you can aggregate it and look at it. You can look at dependencies. You can see what other products are being sold with certain items, and you get a better feel for what the movement of those products is through your stores. Once you fully understand that, you can create what we call supply chain mapping. And if you have like a limited set of products, you can start with those which are most critical to business. If you have a broad set, you can aggregate into some groupings and break them down later. But basically, the map creates kind of an end-to-end supply chain diagram that, you identify the dependencies, the bottlenecks, the single points of failure. And it also includes the subcomponents. What are your suppliers like, and where are they sourcing their materials as well? And then additionally, you really need to look at, the routes and the freight costs, and how is that going to be affected as well? And you ask yourself various questions, are key products coming from, one supplier or within one geography? Is that a risk? And then, of course, looking at that bottleneck, are there transportation bottlenecks as well? The one thing I think has been very positive the last 10, 15 years, I think companies have focused more and more on the health of their suppliers. They understand their suppliers from a financial stability standpoint, from production capacity, quality control, et cetera. And they actually look at how resilient the supplier's supply chain is as well. Good companies are doing that to really understand the full impact as you go backwards from your supplier to the sub-suppliers. And making sure those relationships with key suppliers, you know them, and they're especially important. I mean, these suppliers are an extension of you and your brand, and knowing them well and knowing the most impactful of them very well is really important. So what can you do in a general sense, right? In high risk areas, you can look to multi-source. Do I have diversification so I'm not vulnerable to just one supplier for one product group or one product in particular? Diversification across locations as well. Am I shipping everything from, Europe or Southeast Asia or Latin America? Can I diversify that and look for other suppliers so I have some contingency in place? Back to the whole deglobalization, nearshoring companies are doing that today, where they're bringing things closer to the market where they're going to be selling things. And then kind of a more unique situation, but some companies are able to do more of a product platform design, where they're designing products that can be easily adapted and manufactured in several locations to provide flexibility and interchangeability. Again, that's kind of for a unique situation. But, my last point here, whatever process you put in place is not to make it a one-time event. I have some examples we'll go through in a moment, but the best supply chain practitioners do some type of review at least quarterly, if not monthly or weekly. And they, really look at the areas of supply chain that are most vulnerable, and they revise their contingency plans every time. So like any ongoing concern in business, having a cadence around it and making it happen every quarter, every month, every week is really important.
This is actually definitely very helpful. And I noticed that you mentioned, Duane, good companies, some companies and things of that nature. I would like to know some of the best examples from maybe one, two, or three of those companies which you have mentioned as good companies, or the companies who have implemented, like razor thin, what they have done, which is really good and can be classified as the best practices, in your opinion.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was fortunate. Some of these were my customers I dealt with, but they're also, you can go get these case studies online. This is not any proprietary information at all. But I'll start with Procter & Gamble. P&G is probably the largest consumer product supplier in the world. So they have to do things at a level where sophistication and supply chain resilience is just, it's job one, really. So they spend time doing regular audits and assessment of all their major suppliers and look for areas of weakness and improvement. They usually do the reviews quarterly, but they can do them monthly for areas where they feel there's risk, or suppliers that really impact the bottom line. They have and maintain a diverse network of suppliers. So they've actually spent time reducing and creating redundancy in their supply chain to multi-source products where they think they could have some risks. So that mitigates risk of supply chain disruption due to all the issues we talked about above, political issues, natural disaster, unforeseen events, etc. They use a advanced planning system that helps them integrate demand forecasting with inventory management and supply planning. And they update those systems constantly, but also look at the results and the trends over time to make sure that they adjust what they're trying to do with the changing market conditions. And then the last thing that I was really impressed about with Procter & Gamble is they've kind of created a digital twin technology of their supply chain, which allows them to really simulate all sorts of different scenarios and understand what could happen, whether or not everybody sitting in front of the computer can imagine it, but what are things that could possibly happen to help them plan for alternatives should some of those disruptions happen. Another company that I have a lot of respect for in the supply chain space is Walmart. They actually do weekly and monthly reviews of the supply chain operations and key KPIs for their largest suppliers. Again, depending on the frequency, depends on the impact of the supplier. And they look at delivery rates, inventory turnover, supplier performance, have a scorecard that they update, at each one of these meetings. Walmart's great. They do some real-time tracking, and they have automated technologies to look at their supply chain and its efficiency, which spans across, their warehouses. They have a lot of product, whether it's in their warehouses, the back of the stores, et cetera. And they really use a lot of the robotic systems that they have there and combine all that to get some real information on the movement of product through their supply chain. They closely collaborate with their suppliers and look at potential disruptions. And one thing I think is interesting with what Walmart does, they've spent a lot of time looking at the contingency and how they push safety stock into the supply chain to create a buffer for any disruptions that could come up. They use also some really advanced software around routing to reduce transportation costs and increase the certainty of delivery. And like the P&G example, they review all this material and the data that comes out of it all the time and make adjustments based on changes to condition. Last one I want to talk about, because it's an interesting twist on it, is what Unilever does. A lot of the same things, but what Unilever's also done is they've laced into all of their supply chain resiliency a environmental, social, and governance metrics to really make sure that their supply chain is also environmentally friendly as well. So they do quarterly and semi-annual checks on their suppliers to evaluate this, and they incorporate those ES&G statistics as part of the supplier review. They use technology to invent, like the other ones, to enhance the visibility. There's some great tools out there that can give you visibility not only on global shipping, but on where your products are, from a truck to your distribution centers, et cetera. And then the other thing that's kind of unique about Unilever, they use this hybrid carbon accounting methodology that they've put on top of their supplier review to really reduce the Scope 3 emissions throughout their supply chain. So they set specific goals on reducing and making their supply chain more environmentally friendly, and they track that as part of any other supply chain statistic. So a great example there of somebody being responsible. I'm sure the others are doing that to some extent, not to take away from what P&G and Walmart does, but these guys were highlighted. Unilever was highlighted for really making that a forefront of what they're doing in supply chain resiliency.
As an ex-Walmart, I can actually say that. I mean, I worked for that organization in their information system division in 97, 98 during that time. And I can tell you at that point of time, I was basically, the applications were using 720 terabytes of data. I mean, you talk about big data at that time, the 720 terabytes of data too. And things like for SKU performance at really in a real-time insights perspective. With that said, we basically know that about 87% of the organizations which have the supply chain resiliency actually have better financial performance. But at the same time, now everybody talks about AI, which is my interesting topic, and AI, Gen AI, computer vision is revolutionizing the supply chain industry. Yeah. It is also what used to take us months to do. We can actually do those things in days and weeks. So the question really comes as that, how do these technologies are improving the supply chain resiliency?
Yeah, great segue into that. I mean, first and foremost, if you look in the four walls of any company, I would say most companies, the better quality data they have is their supply chain data. And as you know from what you've done with Next Gen Invent, data quality is always a key issue to success with artificial intelligence. I've seen so many instances where, garbage in, garbage out, and it just gets exacerbated with AI. So there is an advantage here, particularly with supply chain, because you do have, now sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge to aggregate point of sale systems and some shipping data and whatnot, but most companies have that data where it can be easily accessed and processed through AI technology, and that's really powerful. I know we're getting closer to our end time, so I'll kind of hit just a couple of key areas here. But going back to the Procter & Gamble analysis, or the Procter & Gamble work, that whole scenario analysis is a huge benefit to deploying AI-driven simulation models too. You can do that. You can look now using AI at a myriad of combinations, but also look at and pull trends out of that analysis and understand, where there are potential failure points, how to handle demand surges, transportation disruptions, et cetera. And AI can really help in identifying the weaknesses in the supply chain and helping companies create the appropriate risk mitigation plans. Other couple of areas, just data analysis in general. The amount of data that AI can analyze is, whether it's structured or unstructured, is enormous. So looking at sales data, inventory levels, transportation records, costs, on-time delivery, et cetera, supplier performance metrics, all those can be layered on top of geopolitical events, weather forecasts, et cetera. And what I've found in doing this with supply chain and other sets of data, the AI can unlock patterns, correlations that you really wouldn't see otherwise. And I think that's a really great use of AI with supply chain data. And then, predictive analysis as well. Being able to forecast demand. A number of the supply chain companies out there that do demand management are actually moving or have moved their models to to AI-based supply chain demand forecasting from what they used in the past. And again, looking at identifying trends, predicting future scenarios, et cetera. The AI technology, if it's used right, is just better than what we had in the past. So a lot of those companies are changing their focus onto more of an AI algorithm. And then the other thing I think is important is just continuous monitoring and alerting. By constantly looking at key performance indicators and any operational metrics, the AI tools can really look at details that maybe you wouldn't see doing normal analysis on trends in the performance. And can help by detecting, deviations from those norms and alerting stakeholders to weaknesses and what may come up and helping you, again, proactively mitigate the risk. Now, Deepak, I know at Next Gen Event that you guys have deployed a few systems in particular around supply chain and supply chain resilience. Are there a couple of those examples you want to share?
Oh, definitely. I will be happy to share. One of the company, which is California-based company, we basically get their supply chain resiliency in place by actually having the different AI models, such as strategy planning, capacity planning, risk modeling, demand forecasting, route optimization. And to your point, actually, really, it gave them the real-time insights and helped them reduce the risk. And that made their actually the supply chain more responsive and robust in that perspective. And I would also like to add some of the points which you mentioned, which is really so true. The data quality has been the issue. And at the same time, I basically think data is oil. And the organizations have really worked hard to come out of the scenarios which is related to data silos. And they have really tried to position themselves in the past 10, 15 years is to reach into the enterprise data stage. And when we basically go into the engagements, we really also, in addition to the things which you have highlighted, we also try to highlight the importance of the ecosystem view of customer demand. What that really means is that you're launching new products, you're expiring maybe few products. What you are actually having the SKU performance at the store level. What you basically have is SKU alternatives. What is, as I mentioned, also capacity planning, risk modeling, demand forecasting, and all those actually help them benchmark and prioritize the risk options they have to actually mitigate the risk, make the supply chain more resilient. And at the same time, implement the supply chain resiliency in 4 stages. Discover, strategize, plan and act, and adopt and optimize. Because by doing that, you can actually look at the process like you highlighted, how you will identify the risk and how you will actually measure the risk and how you will mitigate the risk. And you can really choose the AI models that, okay, I'm going to apply this AI model to automate it.
Hmm.
I'm actually going to use this AI model to communicate with my vendors and customers, for example. This is the AI model. In this step, I'm going to actually quantify the risk, or this is actually prescriptive analytics. I can actually really tell you, because we're swimming in data, but information is not there. So really tell you something on which you can, the insight, which is, so that you can make an actionable, you can take an action on that actionable insight. And that's very important. Now, I know we are coming towards the end of it also. Then I basically know that from your discussion and what I hear is that supply chain resilience is not a trend anymore. It's a necessity. The environment is going to get more volatile. It's not going to improve, in my opinion. Geopolitical conflicts are not going to go away in any case as well. And probably that is the reason 58% of the organizations have allocated more supply chain budget, risk management budget for the next year. With that, what will be the 3 key takeaways or a couple of key takeaways, Duane?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on my first one a little bit, but the first one is, just to reiterate it, don't expect things to remain the same. The normal of 10, 15 years ago is not, we're not going to go back to that. As you mentioned, geopolitical, global warming issues, depopulation, labor costs, deglobalization, those are all going to lead to changes and unpredictability in your supply chain. So spending the time on supply chain resilience and looking at those, alternatives is more important today than ever. The second takeaway that I think is really important is take advantage of the data that you have, right? That data is there with, not a whole lot of work to clean it. You can probably do some really detailed analysis by deploying some AI technology to help you do some of these analysis. There are certainly technology vendors out there today that can help you with some out of the package solutions. More often than not, you're probably going to need something that's a little bit more customizable, depending on the sophistication of what you're trying to do. But I think taking advantage of these technologies that are out there today, we didn't have them 10 years ago, we didn't have them 5 years ago. They're there to help you mitigate, this and navigate this storm, if you will. And then my last point that I said a few times, I think, is just do not make this a one-time event. Create a cadence for your company where you're constantly looking at your supply chain, constantly looking at your suppliers, constantly looking at the weakness, making sure that you have some duplication, some risk management in there, some alternatives, so that you don't get caught flat-footed when something does come up. And, I've seen companies that had plans from 3-4 years ago. Well, guess what? 3-4 years ago is a long time ago, and those plans are no longer relevant. So making sure that this is a continuous process, a periodic process, get your company into that cadence and make sure you're doing the right things here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Duane, with that. And I really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.